Hey, I'm Dr. P. Not only am I a leadership coach, I'm a change agent and I'm a race scholar. I've used my study of race to dismantle systems and organizations, but I also use that to help you as the individual become a better leader for your families and for your community.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I am so excited for CSRN to have the opportunity to have Toledo City Council member Nick Komives on to speak with you all about the Toledo Police Department budget. Now, it's no surprise that Nick Komives is here today. Nick is actually a really foundational part of the work that CSRN has been doing over the past summer with bringing forward legislation through Toledo City Council with the Right to Know Act. But just to give you a little bit of information, Nick Komives is once again a Toledo City Council member, but he had his start in activism, and he worked and currently works with the Equality Toledo, which is the local LGBTQIA representation. And he stands up for all people. He stands up for anyone who is unaccounted. He stands up for the silent majority of our population that often goes overlooked. And it's because of his dedication to the people that CSRN is so excited to have Nick come on today. And he is using some of his know-how, some of his connections, and some of his just general awesomeness to tell us about some research that he has completed to just give us some background information. We've talked a lot about the Toledo Police Department's budget and how that money is being spent. CSRN has been at the forefront of the Refund Toledo initiative. And so we have Nick Komives here to give us some of those details. So at this time, I will give all power over to Nick. Please, 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 if you have any questions for Nick as he is presenting, you can submit them in the chat. And we want you to be engaged. We want you to ask questions if you have any. And take it away, Nick.
Awesome. Thank you. That's a lovely introduction, and I really appreciate it. I have certainly had the pleasure of working with CSRN for a number of years. When I was before I was elected, I worked with Equality Toledo as their executive director, and oftentimes we partnered with CSRN to build momentum and support around various protests or rallies or initiatives in the community. So it's always good to be with my CSRN friends and be able to present. And so, like Ruth said, we've been doing some deep diving into all things TPD this summer in light of the protests that followed the murder of George Floyd. As well as the recent and really unfortunate news that we received yesterday that yet again justice will not be served in this case, and that clearly white supremacy cares more about property than they do about Black bodies. So we have a lot of work to do. It's going to take a long time for us to dismantle these systems that we know are oppressive and rampant throughout our communities. So with that being said, I'm going to spend maybe about 20 minutes or so on a PowerPoint presentation that hopefully doesn't put you to sleep, just to kind of give you some high level ideas of what TPD's budget looks like, where the revenue comes from, and things of that nature. And then I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about what ways you, as a viewer, as a person in and around Toledo or your local community, can work to change this process, to bring more transparency, to add a level of accountability, the types of things that are needed in order for us to be able to move forward as a more just society. So with that, I'm going to share my screen here so you can see this lovely PowerPoint that I have put together. Maybe a little biased in saying lovely. But I also want to be sure to be very clear that I would love for, excuse me while I jump back to you, I would love for you all to ask me questions as we go through this. So feel free to drop them in. I have my phone open next to me. Ruth is going to text me any questions that come in. So there might be a lag, but please feel free to ask me any questions that you might have. And I can't promise you that I will have the answer, but I will certainly be making note of them to get answers. This is a process that is lengthy and cumbersome, and this moment, this putting this presentation together alone was a huge learning curve for me. So with that, here we go. So we're going to take a look at TPD's budget. It's just a brief overview from 2017 until the present. And of course, that's our lovely city skyline in the background. So an overview for tonight, we're just going to take a look at the overall city budget. I'm going to speak to it very high level. And then we're going to do the same with a little bit more in-depth analysis of TPD's budget. And then I want to spend some time on how it can be changed, and then maybe get some ideas on what you envision as an appropriate budget for TPD, and what the idea of safety means to you, and how we reach that in our community. So here's a graph that doesn't look all that great, because in order for me to show you how much money is being spent on safety, I have to make the other numbers almost invisible, because the reality is that the bulk of the money that is spent, your money, your tax dollars, the majority of your tax dollars are going to our police department and our fire and rescue department. You also see non-departmental that encompasses a whole lot of things that just make the city operate in general. But on the whole, the majority of your tax dollars are going to our police department and our fire and rescue department. You will note in here that things like the Human Relations Commission, you don't see in here Youth Commission because it's no longer funded. You don't see a whole lot, frankly, in terms of expenditures going to anything except for these safety initiatives. And a lot of that is because the city has been losing revenue streams for a number of years. One of the largest ones that we see is a cut in what we refer to as the local government funds. So when you pay taxes, when you either send in your check for your property taxes or it's coming out of your paycheck, it's going to a lot of different places. And when it's broken down, your income tax, the majority of your income tax comes to the city. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit here in a moment. But you're also paying state and federal taxes, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, things of that nature. That money that goes to the state is then put into a larger budget, obviously, that is comprised of tax dollars coming from all over the state, and then our state legislature decides how to spend it. Local government funds used to be doled out in a more equitable manner, in a more robust manner, that would allow for cities to be able to pay for essentially what we would consider basic needs. So a lot of the money would go to roads, which we don't see anymore. A lot of it would go to neighborhood programs. So we've seen drastic cuts from the state in terms of local government funds. So your tax dollars going to the state are not coming back to the city of Toledo. And what does this mean? This means, in my opinion, it's a move to defund. So there's a lot of talk about defunding right now. And that talk often um, leads to some negative connotations. But the reality is, we've been seeing defunding in a lot of areas: education, our roads, our local government funds. And when they're making cuts like that, they're putting the burden back on local governments to cover things like police, because most people have this vision in their head that police expenditures are certainly allowable, and that we should be spending quite a bit on police, because we all have a duty to, or a desire to feel safe in our own communities. And so, what happens when they slash local government funds? Well, for us, it's been a slash in our road repair. It's been a slash in our spending on parks, on recreation, on our youth commission, on opportunities for youth to do things like various sports or other activities throughout the city. And so the state has been defunding us for some time. And in that, they're also defunding the police. So the Republican held legislature in Columbus has been defunding for a long time. And in fact, they've been defunding police. They just don't want to pretend that's what they're doing. It doesn't fit their narrative, and that's just where they're at. So that's some high level talk on the funding stream and how we get to where we are. But as you can see, the city's budget, and like I pointed out, is the majority of it goes to safety forces. So understanding TPD's budget, we're going to spend a couple minutes kind of looking at it. But I think this number is quite shocking. 33% of your tax dollars automatically right now are going to the police department. A little over 1/3 of the overall spending that the city of Toledo does from general fund goes to the Toledo Police Department. So where does this money come from? Well, revenues come in mostly from our general fund, as I've mentioned. And the general fund is comprised of many different avenues that we see money coming in, but the overwhelming majority of it comes from income taxes. So as you are out working and receiving your paycheck, when you see that amount come out in income taxes, much of that is coming to the city of Toledo. And that's ultimately how we end up generating the majority of our revenues. Outside of that, we do get some money that comes in from fines and forfeitures. We do invest some of the tax dollars that we receive, and we make an earnings off of that. We issue licenses and permits throughout the city. We do collect very little on property taxes, and that is mostly what are assessed charges or charges for services. And so, when we're out pushing the snow around on a snowy day, trimming trees, taking down trees, collecting your garbage, all these types of things. These are money that you, in addition to your income taxes, are sending to Toledo to be used. So that's what makes up our general fund. And in the general fund, about almost $87 million of that is devoted, as I said, to our police department. And so you might be asking yourself, how are they spending that? Well, I thought this graph on the left, or this image on the left, is quite telling. And that total salaries line tells a large story of where the majority of our tax dollars are going when it comes to the police department. You'll see that the base salaries equal a little over 51 million. There's a lot of overtime, and we see that number be about that range almost every year. As we look back over the past 5 years, it's stayed somewhere around 3 million. And then there are fringe benefits, that's your healthcare, vacation time, those types of things. And that comprises about a little over $65.5 million. And that is purely based on salary. So that money is going to go out and is dependent on the number of employees within the department. After that, there's some money being spent on supplies. You can see it's quite nominal in comparison to the overall. spending that goes to the police department. And then there are contractual uh, payment or dollars that go out, and these are things that are agreed to in the police union contract. And so that encumbers tuition assistance if our officers are attending higher education. They can apply for and receive tuition assistance. There's an allowance for clothing, so they can purchase various clothing that they might have to wear on the job. There's meals. There's all kinds of things written into the police department's agreement contract with the union, and perhaps that could be another evening to talk about what all is included in there. Um, and then there are also capital improvements where we're spending money. So that's buying new vehicles, which we're actually, the administration is trying to get us to move into a leasing um, agreement as opposed to buying vehicles outright. But it also includes building improvements. So if we need a new roof on one of the um, police buildings, or if there's maintenance fees or anything like that, then that money comes out of our capital improvements dollars. Those are not tied to your income tax, although the money ultimately comes from it, but a certain percentage. So it's another breakdown on taxes we could do another night. And then there are other expenses that aren't shown on the left, and most of those are what we refer to as chargebacks. So within the city, it's made up of various departments, obviously, the police department being one of them, fire and rescue department being one of them. There's also IT, so they handle anything that has to do with computers, obviously. There's a city garage or a city shop where they're repairing all of the vehicles that the city has. There's the risk management fund, which is where money is put in from various departments to fulfill a fund. So that way, if there's ever, let's say that you get hit by a police vehicle or get into an accident with a water department truck. So that that fund is what is largely comprised of various chargebacks from different departments. So that way, if there's ever a lawsuit that's faced by the city and they're required to pay out, then it would come from the risk management fund. So there are various ways that they are spending their money, but I want to really, really highlight that the majority of the spending that is happening in our police department is literally tied to salaries, overtime, and fringe benefits. And why this is important to note, because the overall spending in the department is not on the various other things that we think of. They are literally spending the majority of the money on paying folks who work in the department. And um, in order for there to be a large reduction in the police department budget, it would have to ultimately equal cuts to the number of people that work in the department. So, how that would look, how it would operate, are questions that could be worked out later. But the reality is that if we were going to make any cuts to the police department budget, it's going to come from the number of people that work in the police department. Additional revenues or other money that comes in. You may have heard the term civil forfeiture before. This is, let's say that there is a person in Toledo who deals drugs and gets caught, and when the police arrest them, they take their belongings that they found on them, and let's say there's $100,000 in the trunk of the car. That money then is forfeited over usually through the court process or the hearings that take place, and then the judgment that comes down. And that money is oftentimes then doled out to various governmental agencies, oftentimes to the court, as a way to fund the court to continue on. Um, some of it goes to the sheriff's department or the police department here locally. So there are a number of places where the forfeiture dollars go, but our police department does see some of that forfeiture. Um, while we're on that subject, I just want to say that I've been looking into how much money that is, because it's frankly somewhat difficult to track down. Um, and then also if there are other uses for it, because I believe that if that money comes from the community, it should stay in the community that it came from, meaning if it was in a neighborhood, then we should put it back into the neighborhood. So there are a number of ways to look at forfeitures and what we could do with it. Another avenue of additional revenues is grant funding. So I have a picture here um, that is of our police department's armored vehicle that was purchased with a Homeland Security grant. I'm not sure when, but certainly pre 2017. And I just want to take a moment to say, what this vehicle to me illustrates. I remember on May 30th being at the protests that were happening, and they were quite peaceful. And I remember as I was standing there listening to the speakers and looking up on the various buildings that surrounded us, seeing police officers from above. And then I remember when the marching began and people rounded the corner onto Cherry Street, and they were met by this vehicle that you see in the photo. And there was a man standing at the top or out of the top of a hatch on the vehicle with a gun aimed at people who were just marching. And so when we talk about escalation, water bottles do not equate to an armored vehicle, in my opinion. It was surprising to be met by such a vehicle. Um, and when I have inquired about the usage of this vehicle, it's striking to me that it seems like we've only been able to use this vehicle so far against our own people. So I think that it asks us a larger question about who are we protecting when we have these types of paramilitary um, vehicles and other things of that nature. So there are other streams of revenues that come in and they pay for things like this. Oftentimes, those additional revenues are going to pay for something quite specific. So before I get here too, I just want to pause for a second, and reflect on this process of trying to get information so I could share anything out about what this budget looks like. The city often will talk about how we have an outdated financial services platform. So we use what is called SAP. If you're in accounting, you likely know what SAP is. SAP is a financial computing software that allows us to track and monitor expenditures, revenues, and all the ways that money is flowing in and out of the various city departments. The problem is that when I was asking a lot of questions of our city auditor about where is money going, I was met with receiving papers that look like this, and I apologize because I can't see myself right now, but I assume that you can see this. But I would get these ledgers that look like this. And you can see here, for instance, on this one, this is a transaction that took place on February the 21st of this year, and went to law enforcement equipment. And it was paid to a vendor called Vance Outdoors Inc. That's literally all the information I was able to get on this. And I'm sure that upon questioning and digging even deeper, we could likely do it. But you'll also see that all of these expenditures add up to be less, or each one individually are less than $10,000. So they don't require city council approval for the purchase of any of these items. Now, my guess is that Vance Outdoors, after looking them up, are similar to the PV Corporation up here and similar to DR Ebel Fire Equipment, which I know is actually a local company. There's also the Keesler Police Supply Inc., right? So Superior Uniform Sales Inc., for instance. It's likely that the majority of these expenditures are probably on various supplies that I alluded to earlier. So they're likely purchasing ammo, which has a certain shelf life. They might be purchasing other police equipment, holsters, bulletproof vests, things of that nature from these companies. But we don't have a ledger that tells us exactly what it is and when they've purchased it. So when I get to my next slide, I'm going to talk about how we can change that, because I certainly would like to see a change on that moving forward. So here we go to this next slide. So I know this was very high level, but I want to spend a minute really delving into what you can do, because for many of us, we've been sort of watching for years this injustice occur, uh, and thinking of different ways that we can be holding ourselves accountable, and making sure that we are dutifully spending our collective dollars in a way that would build a safer community, and one that all of us can thrive in. And so it's really incumbent upon all of us to take steps. It's not good enough to just sit back, and I think that we all certainly realize that at this point. And um, so I think hopefully this slide gives you some ways, some ideas to do that. But the first one I would say is certainly require accountability. I think the most interesting thing about this summer to me is the lack of interest on the part of local law enforcement to accept accountability. Um, the reality is that I watched four of my colleagues this summer be arrested and later indicted, and going through a process that has to do with a level of accountability. That if you are an elected official, you're held to a certain standard. But I don't think that standard is left only to people that are elected. I think it applies to anybody who is working on behalf of our residents in the city of Toledo, our folks who are paying tax dollars to see a strong community put together. And part of that accountability for us, and it was alluded to earlier by Ruth, that we worked on and passed um, a law through an ordinance through city council that requires police officers who are out on the streets and interacting with residents or people in the city of Toledo to supply them with a business card that would include the number to the Internal Affairs Department and has the name and badge number of the officer. And we did that for accountability reasons, that when people are treated like human beings from the get-go, and are met with humanity, it's unlikely that ever there would be a scenario where somebody would have to call internal affairs to report somebody. But the reality is that people aren't seeing that on a daily basis, and that we want to find ways, find policies that are simple but create a more just environment. So, although it didn't seem like a very large move to make that happen, um, we still did, and it will have a great impact. The interesting thing is the level of pushback on business cards alone that we saw from, in particular, coming from the police unions, TPPA, who are very resistant to this change. And I find it alarming because accountability is so much larger, and our focus is going to be on a much larger picture. And the next step in accountability from CSRN and other like organizations throughout Toledo is around a working civilian police review board. And so that level of accountability will force um, our officers to consider their actions ahead of time, hopefully, that a citizen-led, separate from the city body could have authority to discipline, to subpoena, to hold people accountable. So accountability is both on that outside way of how we create mechanisms to hold people accountable, but also there's accountability in budgeting. And so the next bullet point is demand more transparency. It's directly tied to require accountability. Um, and it speaks highly to these forms that I was talking about just a few minutes ago, that we have a duty to demand more accountability on the police department, so there's clearer reporting on what money is being spent on. So I am fully committed to that and working with our auditor and the city council to require that, because we are approaching budget season. In November, the mayor's administration will share with city council their proposed operating budget for 2021, and city council will have until March of next year to pass a budget, although they've been trying to get us to pass it in January. So there's a lot of work to be done coming up, because we are going to see those numbers and we're going to be able to demand that transparency. But none of it can happen without you. And so I need you to hold me and other elected officials accountable. It's interesting. I do not hear from you all or folks as much as I would like to be honest. We receive very few emails. We see very few people come to meetings. And that means that there's a lot of opportunity for those folks who do email or show up to meetings to make an impact. So that pressure that you apply to elected officials is real. They respond to it. And for many elected officials, it is all about getting reelected. And so when you threaten that for them, they think differently. There's also a consideration for ballot initiatives. I skipped over this bullet point, but there have been ballot initiatives done throughout this city for a long time, and the most recent one was the ballot initiative for the Lake Erie Bill of Rights. Kudos to those folks who worked on that, by the way. But there are ways. So if we're having a difficult time getting a civilian review board passed through city council that is meaningful and that has teeth, then certainly a ballot initiative could be done to make that change. And there are a number of different initiatives that could be considered for the ballot in the future. You definitely want to follow CSRN. You're here because you are, so I appreciate you very much for doing that. There are a number of other local, statewide, and national organizations that you may want to consider following and staying up to date on. And you can find those and more on CSRN's page, Facebook page, and I would encourage you to do so. Show up. It's interesting. I mentioned already that it is very infrequent that folks actually come to city council meetings. The busiest ones are always the controversial ones when we're talking about generally more national issues, I would say, but they tend to spark a higher interest. But showing up is extremely powerful. It shows that you care. It shows the elected officials that you're paying attention. It shows those in the administration that you're paying attention, and it has, I would say, the largest impact for sure. Brother Washington spoke about organizing in small groups at the rally that occurred on Saturday outside of the police station downtown. And I really, really love this idea. I remember working on the marriage campaign, and we were advocating for folks to do this same type of thing. These smaller conversations are really where you have an opportunity to listen and respond in a more impactful way, in a more direct, personal way that can really change someone's heart and mind, right? I mean, we know that, and I saw a poll today, several months ago, it was kind of incredible. Finally, people were people were willing to say Black Lives Matter. And, it hasn't always been popular to say that, which is just incredibly appalling and shocking, of course. But people had become a little more willing to do so at the beginning of this summer. That luster is disappearing. I'm sure that yesterday's announcement out of Louisville will re-spark a lot of folks. I'm curious to see the outcome of the investigations that are done around the killing, the murder of George Floyd, and what that's going to do. And hopefully it brings people back to this movement in the way that we saw at the beginning of the summer. But we all have this opportunity to have these smaller, more intimate conversations with our family and our friends, and to do it frequently. Do it frequently. Too often people want to avoid conversations because they're difficult, or because we've been conditioned not to talk about religion or politics, at the dinner table. But the reality is that literally everything is political, and all of it has ramifications. And you are the best advocate to those that are close to you. So please, please, please talk with your family and friends. Think about maybe hosting a specific party just to have this conversation. Join a book club like the No Name book clubs that exist. There are a number of ways that you can organize in small groups to make a change. And last, I would say, sign the petition to refund Toledo. This is an initiative that I know CSRN has taken on over the past couple of months as a way to really reimagine what it is that the police department um, could look like, what our city could look like, what safety could look like, how we reimagine what funding, what a budget means. To me, a budget is a reflection of our values. It shows what we care about the most. We spend $0, zero, on a youth commission. We spend 86 million on police. So to me, it's a reflection of where our values are. There's a lot of work to do. And this concept of refunding, I think, is spot on. There's a Kendrick Sampson tweet that I saw recently where he closed the tweet with defund, give us our refund, abolish, build better. And these are tough concepts. These are somewhat new concepts for most people, but they're not concepts that are outside of our realm of being able to talk about and to be able to envision what it looks like. So I would challenge you to certainly sign the petition, share it, spread it around, get folks to sign up for the petition as well. But be thinking about what a budget, what a more meaningful budget to our city could look like. And with that, I want to leave you with the question, what does safety look like for you? And this is a question that I get frequently these days, mostly by Julian Mack from CSRN, who asks me this nearly every time he and I chat. And I'm thinking about it often. And I'm just going to challenge you to think about it as well. I don't want to give away all the ways that I have been thinking about it, but certainly I'm looking at it through a budgetary lens as we move into budget season. But I would challenge you to do the same and have this as perhaps a leading question in your small groups that you might organize. And with that, I spent about 40 minutes talking about a budget. I want to thank you for your time and your energy. The fact that you showed up to this, that you paid attention, is incredibly powerful. But what you choose to do with it after is the most meaningful part. I would also like to just reiterate that, the bulk majority of the spending is not on supplies or areas that we think that it can come from. So as we talk about what reimagining or what a refund for Toledo would look like, we have to understand, accept, and think about the new and interesting ways that cutting a budget would look like, and what it would mean. And in our case, it's mostly tied to personnel. So that is where I will leave it. I think Ruth will probably pop back in here in a second. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I do want to say quickly, too, that's my email address to City Council. Please feel free to reach out to me at any time. I'm accessible through Instagram and Facebook as well. I see there are a number of questions that I was not able to see, so we can go through them, Ruth, if you want to. After I cough, excuse me.
Wow. Okay, then. Thank you so much, Nick, for that amazing presentation. There was a lot of information and there are a lot of questions. So we are going to jump right in, just so we are respectful of everyone's time. So starting from the beginning, our first question or statement, and I'm going to pull it up on the screen. It comes from the Scott Sand Show. He wanted to tell you that that was not a tank. So thanks for pointing out the fact that the Toledo Police Department is utilizing lots of different military level equipment, lots of very large armored vehicles that, you know, can easily be mistaken for a tank. Then we had some comments, I guess, when you talked about the military level equipment being gifted. Now you did state that it was they are gifted from the military, but the police department has the right to deny the gift, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, city council would ultimately be the backstop. So the city's charter says that any expenditure, anytime we spend money or we accept money that is more than $10,000 in value, then city council must approve that. So
Okay.
the
So they
DHS.
can accept the tank for $9,999.
I actually could research this and find out when we got it.
Okay.
But at some point, city council very likely accepted the grant that paid for that vehicle. I will say the most recent one that I can think of, that I think we actually considered this year, was a watercraft that was joint police department and fire department to patrol the Maumee River, essentially, because there are a lot of boats that kind of go through in and out and whatnot, and then also some that catch on fire, and we don't have the right equipment to put them out if we need to. So this boat would do all of those things, and I want to say that I believe it was something like 95% of the funds to purchase that vehicle were going to come from grant dollars.
Okay. Okay. We have a comment from Heather who says that she really appreciates all of the work, Nick, that you put into this, and I wanted to give a shout out to CSRN for the teaching.
Mhm.
Then we have a comment from Demetrius. He says, wait. So I talked to military personnel and I've done research on this topic as well. And most of the equipment the police have, for my understanding, is gifted from the military when they get ready to do their, I'm going to spend billions of dollars in upgrading of the equipment.
Yeah, so I think we kind of just spoke to this. This is also part of discovering like perhaps what an inventory of all of our equipment would look like within the police department. It is true that there are some things, but like I just said, any dollars that would come in or any gifts, even gifts that would come in, would have to be approved by city council. So and I haven't seen a large number of these come through in my time on city council. The those paramilitary things that we have predate me for the most part that I'm aware of. I tried to go back and look them all up. I'm so sorry. I promise it's not coronavirus. And also, we're not together, so stop doing that.
So,
but yeah, so they would have to come through city council. And like I said, the majority of the spending on supplies goes toward ammunition or other, vests or other holsters, things of that nature.
okay. Alrighty. Another question from the Scott Sand Show. Nick Komives, you are on the spot. Are you endorsing or advocating this Refund Toledo petition?
I think, well, first of all, hi, Scott. How are you? I'm ready to ride around in a golf cart with you. That will be really fun. And the answer is yes, I'm absolutely advocating for and endorsing the Refund Toledo petition without hesitation.
All right. All righty. We have another question from Albert Earl. Is the dropped program included in the budget?
I am not familiar with the dropped program, but I do want to say this while this question has been posed to me, because one of the things that I struggled with in trying to find out more about the police department's budget was that things are not broken down into categories within the department. So, for instance, I was not able to find out how much money specifically was spent on the SWAT team. I was not able to find out specifically how much goes to internal affairs or domestic violence cases or detectives in general or the lab, right? Because it's all coded under the same code in our financial computing system. So it would take a much deeper dive, one that I'm about to do with the city's auditor after this experience, to discover those types of things. So there's, from what I've been able to glean so far, Mr. Earl, is that in fact, there is no way to tell exactly how much money has been spent on any program.
All righty. So we have another question about that $10,000 threshold. And it says, when it comes to something like the under $10,000 purchases that do not need approval from council, should we as citizens or as residents be demanding council oversight for those purchases or transparency when it comes to what is purchased, or both? Are those even changes that council can demand from TPD?
Yeah, this is a good question. Thanks for that, Heather. The $10,000 limit is embedded in our city's charter, which is basically like our constitution, and it's delineates all the powers of each body and et cetera, and how spending and those things. So 10,000 is currently the cap. There is a movement underfoot to maybe raise that amount to $100,000, meaning that anything that is brought in or sent out from the city could be done if it's under $100,000. So, yep, there are some things that I would argue this is an okay use, and that we, probably could do that, because the reality is some things just costs more than when we set that limit in place, and most things are pretty harmless. But I do think that oversight and accountability matter in a lot of ways, and if we feel like there is a department that could use a little bit more oversight, then we should absolutely be demanding that, no, undoubtedly. But it'll be interesting as I continue to dig to see if these purchases are broken up into smaller ones, and maybe they should have qualified to be over 10,000. So there's a number of things that we're still learning about and trying to decipher. But yes, city council should be acting as a backstop to kind of check this type of spending. So. And like I mentioned before, since all of these are coded under one code and it's just difficult to decipher what is actually being spent, we should be demanding a clearer, more transparent budget.
Okay, definitely. Okay. From Mike Nestor, he asked, where does the movement to engage a citizen review board stand currently with council?
Yeah. So I think, at the beginning of the summer, I remember very much council being in favor of a number of changes, right? And then, as we've seen support for Black Lives Matter erode over the summer, I would say that support in general for reforms or changes within police departments has also been eroding at the same rate. And so I say that to say that, I haven't asked my fellow colleagues lately how they feel about a civilian review board, but I do recall many of them, if not almost all of them, being supportive of a civilian review board being in place at the beginning of summer. And in fact, there were a number of changes that had been proposed that were put on a back burner because of the indictment of my 4 council members. So you'll remember that we were getting ready to appropriate $100,000 to go toward a civilian review board that would provide for some actual staff and people working on it. And that was a measure that we were all getting ready to, and I believe would have absolutely passed. But you see, what happened was,
I think I heard about it.
The arrest of our 4 council members, and then there was a movement to create a separate body that would review and recommend. And And to me, Civilian Review Board is one of those things that I don't need to wait for recommendations on. I
Right.
think that we all are aware that accountability matters. There's not a job in the world
Mhm.
where you can do whatever you want and get away with it, except for one that I can think of. So, I think that accountability certainly does matter. I think that Civilian Review Board is one that council should take on without receiving a recommendation from that task
Mhm.
force. There are plenty of models and tons of research on this topic. And so that is why, at Saturday's rally, I made sure to mention the sort of high level bullet points of what we're going to be looking at. But myself, and a number of community advocates and organizations are working on creating actual ordinances so we can create a civilian review board that actually meets, because they haven't even met in over a year, which is unfathomable.
Yeah.
So they can actually meet and they can actually have some teeth. And we'll be bringing that forward in the coming weeks. And so I would encourage you all to be paying attention to when that's coming forward so we can implement it through council.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So, quick thing. I just want to say thank you to everyone who has been submitting questions. You guys are on top of it, and I love all of this. So, we have a few more to go. And Nick, you are doing a great job answering these questions. Thank you so much for your time and for everyone who is still tuning in. So, let's look at a question from Heather Nye. Now, this one was answered in the chat, but Nick, you can just go into it a bit as well. What is the best way to keep up with the calendar for council meetings and events for the public?
So there's currently actually a process where the city is revamping the city's website, which I think is going to be very helpful. In a lot of ways, our city is behind the times because we didn't invest in certain areas, and I would say information technology is one of those areas, but that's been changing. So there will be a revamp of the website, which will hopefully make it even easier. But you can access any meeting. We're doing all of our meetings on Zoom right now because of coronavirus. So you can access any of the links to see those meetings, to provide comment. You can place an e-comment in there as well, but you can find all of this through the city website if you click on the City Council tab for the City of Toledo's website.
Okay.
I hope the link was shared in the chat.
Yes. And so the link https://toledo.ohio.gov/government/city-council/. I will just show that right there. Thank you, Ramona, for adding that into the chat. Now we have another question from Demetrius, and I'm a little confused with what he meant, and so I don't want to interpret it the wrong way, so I'll just post it the way it was written. And he says, this board, if a person is injustice, how can we get rid of them?
Yeah, so I think essentially you're just asking the question of what are the disciplinary procedures for within our police department, and if the Civilian Review Board, as it is currently, found there to be a need for discipline, the current Civilian Review Board could not do that. So they might, first, what ultimately happens is, let's say that you, Demetrius, have had an interaction where you're demanding, something be done. You weren't pleased with your interaction with the police department. That complaint goes to the Internal Affairs Department. And I will tell you that the community-driven internal affairs complaints are very, very low. People are not really reporting back to the police department when they've had a negative interaction. And I would say part of that is because if you go to the police department's website, it's really difficult to figure out how to do that. And so, with that being said, the next step in the process, once you elevate it to internal affairs, is that the internal affairs would do their investigation. They would come out with what their findings are. And if they were going to do discipline at that time, they would do so. Let's say that the outcome is not to your desire. Well, you could contact the Civilian Review Board that we have in place right now. Like I've already mentioned previously in this discussion, they've not met in over a year, so it'd probably most likely be a waste of your time. But even if they did meet, and they did come to a different finding than what the Internal Affairs Department found, they could provide a recommendation to the police department that this type of discipline take place, but it would be incumbent upon the police chief, internal affairs, and the leadership of the police department to take whatever course of action and discipline that they want to take.
Okay. Thank you. Question from Heather Stanfield. What would be something that would need a ballot initiative versus talking to council directly?
The simple answer is anything. Meaning that, it's not the most desirable route to go, right? It's really set up to make it quite difficult. You can ask anybody who worked on the Lake Erie Bill of Rights how difficult this process is for a number of reasons. One, because you must first you must draft your language and get it approved. Then you must collect signatures of supporters or folks who want to put it on the ballot. Then it goes to the Board of Elections. They approve all those signatures that you've gathered. They make sure that they're all eligible people who can do this because, by the way, you can only get people who are registered to vote to sign up for it. Then there's all kinds of complications about well, is this person even permissible to do it? Blah, blah, blah. Then it goes to city council at that point, and we approve whether or not it goes on the ballot. And so there's yet another link in that chain that probably shouldn't be there because a citizen-driven initiative, I don't believe, needs to be checked yet again by city council. The citizens have spoken, just like they did when they elected us. So at any rate, it then goes up for a vote, and then you have to do the whole campaign, and you got to get people to support what you're doing and hope that they come up with the right outcome. But to answer your question, anything that you want to bring forward, you could bring forward, certainly, any change that you want to see. I would highly recommend, of course, first trying with city council for a number of reasons. Ballot initiatives are expensive. You often have to raise a lot of money to do them. And then there's also the cost to the city. So for instance, when we put the Lake Erie Bill of Rights on the ballot in February of last year, whenever that was, it cost the city about $270,000 just to put that election on for the Lake Erie Bill of Rights. And then subsequently, due to its failure of being defended in court, which is a travesty, the city has now had to pay attorney's fees for those folks who represented the counter argument for Lake Erie Bill of Rights. So all in all told, it's cost the city about $500,000 at the end of the day to bring that initiative forward. So I'd caution on bringing forward something small and would recommend that you don't do a ballot initiative unless it's something that's quite large. So if the Civilian Review Board, for instance, were to fail and we don't have any outcome on a new Civilian Review Board, that is one that I could absolutely see becoming a ballot initiative.
All righty. Let's see. Do we know the percentage of police that live in Toledo currently?
We do not. And this is I know this question has been asked, and I want to say that I believe that a Freedom of Information Act, which is how you request public records, request came through on this, and I think that the city is not required somehow legally to tell where all of their employees live, probably for privacy reasons and protecting folks. But that being said, it used to actually be a requirement that if you worked for the police department or the fire department that you lived in the city of Toledo. That has since been ruled by the Supreme Court to be illegal. It wasn't our case that made it to that level. It was another jurisdiction that did. But my point is, we're not allowed to require people to live somewhere. We can incentivize our employees to live in the city in some way. And I know there has been a movement for that. I know that a couple of folks have advocated for purchasing or, the number of properties that the city has in their land bank, vacant houses, and then partnering with various institutions or labor unions to kind of fix these places up, and then partnering with the financial institutions, kind of complicated, I'm getting very high level, financial institutions to provide low mortgages or discounted rates or whatever the case might be, if it goes to like teachers and police officers and firefighters, right? So there is some momentum around that. And while you asked that question, and while I'm talking about this specifically, I want to mention that, the reality is, that folks who live and work in their community are likely to be, and this is, research has found that they're more likely to be caring and respectful and committed to their own community because they have to live there. And I've
Okay.
unfortunately heard too many police officers in the Toledo Police Department tell me that they don't even feel safe living in Toledo. And, I obviously live in the city of Toledo, and for the most part, I feel pretty safe here. I think that there's always going to be a level of feeling unsafe for people, and depending on various other elements about who you are and identities, you might feel less safe than others.
Right.
And so I recognize my privilege when I say that I feel mostly safe, but I find it really alarming that those who are sworn to provide for our safety don't feel safe in our own community. So, I would love to see that change, of course, because I think it would mean a much safer community for all of us if we were as committed as living and working in the same place.
Alrighty. Alrighty. We have a few more questions and then we can wrap up. But this one is from Julian Mack. It says, "This is Julian Mack. I am hearing you reference the Toledo Charter that City Council uses. I've had conversations with TPD, Toledo Police Department, saying they use the Ohio Revised Code, or ORC, in reference to enforcement of marijuana laws. Given the passage of Sensible Toledo, which changed the Toledo Charter to decriminalize marijuana up to 99 grams, should TPD still be making arrests for marijuana charges under 99 grams?"
So, simple answer, of course, I don't believe that they should be making arrests for folks. Let's just also be really clear that I just can't believe that Ohio is this far behind, right? Like, I can literally drive 10 minutes to the north and purchase whatever I want to and use it there, and then whatever. So it's that alone is a little bit like, okay, really? But if we're gonna make it illegal to have, and the citizens have spoken and said that they want to decriminalize this, then we should be listening. Now,
Right.
what the complication here is that the city used to charge people under Toledo code, right? And so what this would mean is that anybody that we arrested for violating Toledo municipal code,
Mhm.
we had to pay for. So we would arrest them, um, transport these folks to Stryker, generally, or now known as CCNO, and we had an agreement with the county that we would pay for a certain number of beds to be filled all the time, or if they were unfilled, we were still paying for them. It was discovered under the Collins administration that if we charge people with the Ohio Revised Code as opposed to the Toledo Municipal Code, then the county becomes responsible for paying for the transport and detainment of individuals. And so what he did to get out of the city having to pay these exorbitant costs for housing folks who are either found guilty or in the process of awaiting trial is that the city could save a lot of money by charging under Ohio Revised Code. And then the county in turn sued us. They lost that case. Excuse me. They lost that case. And so now they're always responsible for, stop it. They're always responsible for covering the costs for these folks. So it would take, the reality, I think what is generally happening is that if they are arresting people for whatever other charge that they might be arresting them for, if they then find find marijuana on them, then they're slapping that ORC code on there as well. It would be as simple as the mayor directing the chief of police to direct his officers, because they have the ability to determine what they're charging people with. So you should put pressure on the mayor and on the police chief to stop charging folks for having less than 99 grams of sensible marijuana.
Interesting. Alrighty. We have a question from Paul Smith. He says, what is council's role in the police union contract, and how often is it negotiated?
Thanks for that question, Paul. I complain about the process for approving union contracts in general, not just the police one, often. And here's why, because this is what the process looks like. So right now, I'm trying to think if there are any departments that are currently in negotiations, but I'll just paint this narrative for you. The most recent one that we voted on was for the fire department. The fire department has some folks contractually through their union uh, essentially carved out. So when they go into a negotiation phase, when they're battling over salaries, wages, and benefits, those folks are pulled off the line, and then they are there to represent their siblings and family of the department in these negotiations. And so the the union is meeting, and they're meeting with the city administration, and they're battling back and forth. We want 25 cents more per hour. We want X amount of dollars more toward tuition fees. We want, X number of days off in a row, whatever it might be. And so they're having this battle back and forth between the administration and the union that's, for the fire department. And they're going back and forth, and they're going back and forth. And then they come to an agreement. And the administration says, yes, we'll sign off on that. And so the union runs back, those union members that were tasked with that are running back to their other members, and they meet, the whole union meets together, and they take a vote. And they vote to approve the contract or not approve the contract. If they vote to approve the contract is then sent to city council for approval or non-approval. Okay. And so this highlights how little of an interaction city council has in this. Part of that is because the city charter says that council is not permitted to negotiate, to make deals, to do all these things. You cannot interfere in personnel disputes or issues of personnel, right? So that's tasked to the administration. So we've written that into our charter. Okay. But essentially what by the time it makes it to me to vote on this, it has gone through months of negotiation. It has gone to a vote of the union. And if we reject it, if council were to reject any of these, then they have to go right back to the drawing table. They have to go back to a vote eventually, right? So there are a number of repercussions for us not voting in favor of these. And also, I can't even think of one that they haven't voted in favor of for some time. So the police union contract is going to be up in the not so distant future. And I would encourage people to be paying attention to what that looks like. But I would tell you that the pressure needs to be applied to the administration, because city council does not have that much involvement. However, you should always be holding your elected officials of all sorts accountable, and you can tell people like me to go to the administration and tell them, you better make sure that, X, Y, and Z is done.
All right. Let's see. It looks like we have a couple questions left. There's a bit of a conversation in the chat, and it looks like both sides are working that out. So this is actually a question about houses and vacant homes. It says there are so many vacant houses. How can we urge them, and I'm assuming she means city administration, to stop building new developments and invading the environment even more when we have some literally sitting there?
I'm going to try and figure out how to best answer this question. There are a lot of vacant houses. And in fact, most of those vacant houses are currently, and those properties are currently owned by the Lucas County Land Bank. And so while Lucas County operates a land bank, the city of Toledo also operates a city land bank. The county land bank is about to transfer thousands of properties in the city of Toledo to the city, which would make us then responsible for mowing, maintaining all of the codes that we expect all of the residents of Toledo to live up to be held to the same standard. So there's a large cost that's associated with this. And so in my opinion, I've been working on housing issues for quite some time right now, and continue to. And one of the things that I'm concerned about is the fact that we're about to take on all these properties and we can barely afford them as it is. How are we going to operate and maintain them? So what can we do with them? So finding occupants is certainly important, and rightfully so. The Lucas County Land Bank's process is quite rigorous. They want to make sure that the financials are in place, that you're going to be able to afford to upkeep and maintain these properties, that you'll be able to put them back in working order. Those things are important because you can put somebody in a house, but if it's not livable, then there's going to be some real issues, of course. So, anyways, I say all this to say that there should be some scrutiny in what happens to these properties once the city takes ownership of them over, and how we do that process. So, and it's tough because to me it feels very inequitable how we've gone through this process so far. If you look at where most of the properties are, they're in the older parts of our city, and that's how they're typically referred to. But you could also change older with minority heavy minority neighborhoods in our city. You can see where these lines are, and so there's some work to be done there to make it more just. I'm rambling right now, so I'm just going to kind of wrap this up. But when it comes to new development, it's the city is very rarely putting money into new developments right now. The way that we tend to, and I'll get the best example that I can point to right now, is if you look at the new apartments that are popping up near the new park, the Glass City Metro Park, that's to come on the east side. That property received a little bit of kickbacks from the city in the sense that we paid for water taps to be put in. We repaved some roads. We did some improvements that would help to kind of foster that project along. But there's a lot to be said about how we do that process, even, right? And how much we're willing to give toward these developers. So should we be diverting that money into older sections of our neighborhoods that could be fixed up, as opposed to these newer ones? I definitely hear you on this question, and I think that there's a lot to be done.
Alrighty, and so I think with that, we can wrap up this inaugural CSRN teaching. Thank you so much, Nick, for your time, for your information, for your dedication, not only to the Black Lives Matter movement, but also to all citizens of Toledo as a city council member. I just want to say on behalf of CSRN, we truly appreciate you. And I thank you so much for just sitting and talking and having conversations with your constituents. And I just wanted to give a shout out to Dr. P, who is in the comments and who is taking people to task. And I love it because let's see, on next Tuesday at 6 p.m. So normally we have our CSRN meetings on Tuesdays from 6 to 7:30, but we are handing over our CSRN meeting for our next teach-in, and that will be with Dr. P, and she will be discussing critical race theory. And I am super excited to hear everything that she has to say, because just if you had a chance to see her comment in the comment section, she knows what she's talking about. And I don't know how to say that without clapping my hands like this, because Dr. P is just make sure you are here. Huh?
She's the truth.
She's the truth. So make sure you are here on next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Thank you so much, Nick, for your time, for your effort. If anyone has any other questions, Nick did give his email address. Can you just shout it out one last time?
Yeah, Nick.Komives, Komives @toledo.oh.gov. Also accessible through the city's website on the city council page. You can reach me through Facebook or Instagram. If you search Nick Komives, I am there.
Yes, indeed. So thank you, everyone. I hope you have a fantastic evening. Stay safe wherever you go. Black Lives Matter, justice or else. Peace.